So word is image, the basis for logo design. And logos, as we know, don't illustrate, they actually identify. So the assignment we're dealing with here, which as I said is the basis for logo design, is to translate a word, a written word, spoken word, into a visual, an abstracted symbol or icon. And include the letter forms, include the actual word itself, but do something with the word to make it express visually what it's talking about. And you had some verbs and some nouns to work with, and some could be interpreted because this could be the season and also the verb or the object. And investigate, do your research first to start understanding logo design, and develop some concepts, then choose your final design. The thing about concept development, and I'll reiterate this in your journals, is that it's not just developing an iteration of the same idea, but exploring a breadth of ideas. So keep that in mind as you move forward and continue to develop your design skills. The more ideas you have to work with, the more likely it is you're going to come up with an appropriate solution. So we'll start with this one, and this is dog. And the letter forms are highly abstracted, which is fine. We're using limited color, sort of a brown, with the red, and then the blue. And this has sort of a modern sense to it. It's also highly abstracted. I think if we didn't know that this was representing dog, that we would actually be able to see dog in it. And that's where it goes maybe a little too far in its abstraction. Definitely we've got the D, and I guess this is an ear. Not sure if this is supposed to be the nose, what that's supposed to be representing. Obviously the body, and then probably the haunches and the tail. The main culprit here for lack of communication or reduced communication is the G itself. Because of how it's oriented, we've totally lost the sense of G-ness. It almost looks like it is reversed and pointing downward. So there we have a little better sense, perhaps, of the word itself. So the use of the cutout paper is really kind of cool. It has a different flavor when you actually bring the hand skills into creating something like this. And rather than everything being entirely digital, having that blend of handwork using pencil and paper as well as the digital in a design process actually enriches the process. And you're not relegated to just the digital realm, which can be really flat and actually unexciting. There's so many different kinds of discoveries that you can make with analog work. And it also affects the brain differently when you're dealing analog versus digital. Your concerns are different when you're working with traditional materials, things you can actually feel and touch, versus going totally digital. With the exception of the tail, it's got some good options going for it. It might have been more interesting to use a lowercase d, then we would have a muzzle idea and maybe the ear, rather than trying to use the uppercase D. The O filled into a circle still works. The main culprit again is the tail with the legibility, or the readability, the communication aspect of the G in its orientation here. And this is copy, and this is a real simple, it's a right idea. It has a kind of extended, very friendly feel with the way the letter forms are treated. And we get a sense of technology with the blue. Blue is a tech color. It's a friendly tech color because it's kind of in the mid-value range and has a little bit of warmth to it. What we read here, though, because of the contrast against the background, is croppy. So this actually becomes an R. What if now it reads more like copy, but we still have this kind of R idea right in here. So what would we do with that to fix that lack of readability? Well, how about that? Now copy reads, and then we get the copy on the O. It was a good idea. It was a right idea. It just needed a little more finessing to avoid confusion. And the thing is, on a white background, the darker blue is darker, so there's more light-dark contrast than with the light blue. The light blue is lighter, so there's less contrast here. So given that we're starting out with this, and we're establishing the bulk of the letter within the blue, the darker blue, the mind, is going to want to see this as a lowercase r. And then we'll see this. Because the blues, the darker blues, are relating to each other. This is the odd man out. So this doesn't involve with the darker blue as easily. That's the better solution. So always consider readability. Another thing is to stand back from your work and look at it at small scale from a distance so that you can actually see what's going on a little more abstractly. Okay, taking a mouth, obviously an open mouth, and inserting it in the place of the O, and then making the other letter forms move away from it works really well. It has still a bit of quietness to it. Probably the lean could be more exaggerated. Maybe the letter forms are actually taller. Maybe this is a lot larger in the space, so it becomes... And then the other letter forms have to kind of stand back from it, but you kind of get the idea here. So I think the scale is probably, it keeps it a little too quiet and too, just too quiet. So make it shout more. How do you do that? Overall, it's an effective solution. It's another shout using the letter forms vertically, which actually reduces the legibility of them. And because we have to change the orientation, and also if the letter forms were running vertically rather than horizontally, in other words, if they were actually run in their normal orientation and fit into the mouth. And maybe the negative spaces also black between them rather than the yellow, because it looks like he's chewing on something rather than yelling. It will be easier to read it. The hand lettering is really nice. The kind of the way everything is compressed works well. But again, if the letter forms were more of a... So if this is the shape that you're dealing with, if the letter forms actually work this way, you get the idea. And of course they would have to be more legible than that, but having the verticality on them within that space works better than this. Also, this is overall more of an illustration than a logo. And while the assignment didn't really specify that you couldn't use an illustration or place the word in context with a larger idea, if you were just dealing with the word itself and not surrounding it with the context of a mouth in a face, what would you have done differently with this? Could you have made this work differently than having to surround it with a face? It's a very striking illustration, very graphic sense to it, but the word is not reading with the intensity that it should. We're not getting loudness and yelling and shouting out of this. So the takeaways for you, whether or not your work was included, are: what did you learn from the crit? What will you apply in your work going forward? So, critique is something that we need to do all the time to make sure, first of all, we stay on track to solve the problem, because the problem with design, or any design, it actually solves a problem directly, or it fulfills a need. So we want to make sure that we're solving the problem fulfilling the need and also addressing all the requirements. At the same time, are your notebooks open? In other words, are you learning? What do you have now because of the critique and because of doing this assignment that you didn't have prior to that? And then what will you do with that? Just some things to think about. Again, if you have questions, drop them in the comments below. You can either do that if you're viewing this on YouTube or you're viewing it in the course platform.